Somewhere on Etna's slopes, there's a vine growing right now that has never been replanted, never grafted, never replaced. Not once in more than 150 years. That shouldn't be possible. In the late 1800s, a microscopic root louse called Phylloxera swept across Europe and did something almost no war ever managed. It destroyed the vineyards of an entire continent. France? Replanted. Germany? Replanted. Nearly everywhere, the old vines were ripped out, and new ones were grafted onto foreign rootstock just to survive. And yet here, on this one mountain, a handful of vines just kept growing, as if nothing had happened. How does a plague that ended wine as Europe knew it simply fail to climb this particular volcano? To get there, we need to understand what this mountain had already survived just to reach that moment, including one of the more unlikely alliances in wine history, forged by a British admiral's sweet tooth. After the Normans saved Etna's wine industry, the mountain didn't simply enter a golden age. It entered several more centuries of quieter ups and downs, the kind of history that rarely makes it into the highlight reel, but shaped the mountain all the same. In the 15th century, King Alfonso of Naples developed a genuine fondness for wine from Taormina and Aci on Etna's slopes. His patronage helped establish a second prestige zone around Aci, and more importantly, helped revive vineyards that had been abandoned during the plague years. Then, in the 16th century, the pendulum swung back. Spanish royalty, now ruling Sicily, began expelling non-Christian communities from the island. The economic fallout was real. With skilled agricultural communities uprooted, focus shifted away from wine toward timber, cut for the ships of Spanish exploration. For a while, the mountain's vineyards took a backseat to empire building happening an ocean away. Out of that instability came something new: Mascali. Effectively the mountain's first planned wine community, a town built with commerce in mind from the start. Merchants imported vine material from Calabria, Messina, Noto, and Palermo, and when that wasn't available, from elsewhere on Etna itself. By 1774, Mascali alone was producing around 420,000 gallons of wine a year. At the time, roughly half of the entire mountain's output. But here's the detail worth sitting with. We already know Etna's earliest vineyards were planted with 5 or 6 intermingled grape varieties, mixed deliberately for balance. By the late 1700s, something else was already narrowing that diversity. Not disease, not politics, but simple commerce. Merchant buying power in Mascali had already pushed the number of marketable varieties down from around 48 to roughly a dozen. Long before Phylloxera, long before any modern conversation about biodiversity in wine, the market itself was already deciding which grapes got to survive. So, by the turn of the 19th century, Etna had already gone through plague, expulsion, and market consolidation. But what happened next didn't come from Sicily at all. It came from the sea, and from a man who had absolutely nothing to do with winemaking. In 1799, King Ferdinand IV of Naples and Queen Marie Caroline were fleeing Napoleon, desperate to avoid the fate that had already befallen the French royal family. The British Navy, under Admiral Horatio Nelson, helped them escape to Sicily. As a gesture of gratitude, the king gave Nelson a title, Duke of Bronte, and roughly 22,000 acres on Mount Etna's northwestern flank. Nelson reportedly saw it as something of a backhanded gift. The land wasn't particularly productive. He took it anyway. A few years earlier, an Englishman named John Woodhouse had started a business in Marsala based on a local recipe for a strong, sweet wine. Nelson loved it so much that Woodhouse renamed it in his honor. First, Bronte Madeira, then simply Bronte. That wine became enormously popular back in the UK, and popularity, it turns out, can reshape geopolitics. This single sweet wine helped cement an alliance between Sicilian royalty and the British crown, a political friendship built almost improbably, on a shared taste in wine. British investment in Sicilian viticulture followed. From the port of Riposto, the British Navy made regular supply runs to Malta, carrying Etna wine alongside everything else. Napoleon's army was kept at bay by the British fleet. The transport routes stayed safe, and the local wine economy, riding on the coattails of a war it had nothing to do with, boomed. Wine secured an alliance. Wine kept the sea lanes open. Wine helped an economy under siege. And it all traces back to one admiral's fondness for a sweet Sicilian recipe. That alliance opened a door, and through that door walked the most productive era Etna wine had ever seen. By the mid-1800s, more than half of Etna's arable land was under vine. In 1848, that meant roughly 25,000 hectares. By 1869, it had grown to 36,000 to 37,000 hectares. By the 1890s, the mountain had reached its historical peak, 50,000 hectares, producing around 1 million liters of wine. Mount Etna was, at that moment, the single most planted wine region in all of Sicily. To put the scale of that trade in perspective, wine here was still commonly measured in a unit called salma, roughly 68.8 liters. In a single year, the Mascali area alone could produce somewhere between 170,000 and 200,000 salme. Do the math, and that's over 13 million liters from one stretch of the mountain in 1 year. About half of it shipped out beyond the kingdom entirely. By 1835, more than half of the island's wine was already being exported, and the wines from Riposto had earned a specific, if unglamorous, reputation across Europe. They were excellent blending wine. Merchants in France and elsewhere used Etna wine to cut, strengthen, and stabilize their own lighter, weaker vintages. It wasn't prestigious work, but it was essential work. In the 19th century, Etna wine was quietly the structural backbone, propping up a large share of European wine. Everything about this era pointed toward continued growth. But then from the other side of Europe, something arrived that had already brought entire wine regions to their knees. Phylloxera arrived in Europe and began a slow, methodical devastation, vineyard by vineyard, region by region. By 1881, it had ravaged vines across the continent, and Etna's vineyard area shrank dramatically, along with everyone else's. But here's where this mountain does something almost no other wine region in the world could do. When Phylloxera reached Sicily, the vines on Etna's steepest, highest slopes were largely untouched. The reason comes back to the same volcanic soil we talked about back in episode 1. Phylloxera hates volcanic sand. The loose, silica-rich structure that lets Etna's vine roots chase water deep underground is the exact same structure that makes it nearly impossible for the root louse to establish itself and spread. This is the answer to the question we opened with. Some of the alberello vines growing on Etna's slopes today are not replanted, not grafted onto resistant rootstock the way virtually every other vine in Europe eventually had to be. They are original, pre-Phylloxera vines, still bearing fruit, protected for more than a century by the same volcanic ground that made this mountain so difficult to farm in the first place. The very thing that makes Etna such a demanding place to grow wine is the same thing that saved its oldest vines from the worst catastrophe in the history of European viticulture. By 1880, Mount Etna had 123,000 acres under vine. Even through Phylloxera, even through the disaster that redrew the map of European wine, the mountain held. So, we have centuries of quiet instability, an alliance built on an admiral's sweet tooth, a peak that made this mountain the backbone of European wine, and a plague that took down nearly everything else in Europe, but couldn't quite climb this particular slope. Every other region that lived through Phylloxera has a story about starting over. Etna is one of the only ones that gets to tell a story about vines that never had to. But surviving Phylloxera wasn't the end of Etna's troubles. The 20th century was coming, with a railway, a new nation's taxes, 2 world wars, and a collapse so severe that by the 1990s, people had all but given up on this mountain entirely.